Back now on Scripps News Live, Special Counsel Jack Smith, who's been investigating and now prosecuting former President Donald Trump for attempts to subvert the 2020 election, has asked the U.S. Supreme Court to step in and decide whether Mr. Trump has immunity from criminal prosecution for alleged crimes committed while he was in office. The move marks the first time that the highest court in the land would weigh in on the prosecution of a former president who's now also, by the way, the current Republican frontrunner in 2024. With his request, Special Counsel Smith is trying to skip a federal appeals court hearing in this case and keep his trial on track, which is scheduled for March of next year. Joining me now to go deeper on this is Calvin Dark, a Democratic strategist and principal and co-founder of RC Communications. Calvin, glad to see you again. So you're here as someone who knows their way around Washington and the inner workings of all this, not as a partisan. So keep us on track here. Trump's lawyers have to respond by next Wednesday to this. Does that mean the justices are going to hear this case in full and also make a ruling for sure?
Well, good to be here. I think if we look at the response from the Supreme Court, to entertain this idea, we can be sure that they understand the urgency and the timing that Jack Smith outlined in his pleading. So I think that we are definitely leaning towards that way because they realize, Jack Smith realizes that for this case, to not be an interference in the upcoming elections, it has to be resolved before next November. And so I think that's why Jack Smith is trying to keep the timing on track for starting on March 4th.
Okay, so Mr. Trump's defense is actually, it's pretty straightforward. Let's take it in two parts. First of all, it's I'm immune as president. I was in office and this happened while I was in office. If he breaks the law, Congress does have a way of punishing him and removing him. That's impeachment. And they pursued that. It, didn't really happen. He wasn't convicted. Is that a strong argument?
I don't think it will be in this case because I think that, one, this is a completely unprecedented situation, which is why the Supreme Court weighing in is absolutely necessary. But I think that we have to understand there's an enormous difference between the due process involved in a criminal proceeding and the largely political process of impeachment. But I think that, as any defendant would, Trump and his attorneys are making that argument to knock down as much as they can the case Jack Smith has against them. But, I think that with this Supreme Court, this question is bigger than just a former President Trump. This decision, if a president is not responsible, can be immune from prosecution for criminal acts committed during his presidency, then we have a lot bigger problems than a potential second term for Donald Trump. That would change the presidency and how it fits in our legal system entirely.
Well, and then the second piece of his defense is that I've already been tried for this. I was tried in the Senate. I was acquitted. Double jeopardy protects me from that. So again, we'll see if they take that on or not. But what we do understand about this process is 4 justices, and they don't declare themselves typically, have to vote to take up a case. That clearly seems to be happening here. It could be all 9 justices. We don't know. Any inkling of what they're going to do? Because, again, every subsequent president could be subject to this if it's a precedent-setting case.
Right. And I think that you hit the nail on the head as to why it wouldn't surprise me if all of the justices wanted to hear this, because this is something that they need to weigh in on. And frankly, we know that they will have to weigh in on it at some point. And considering that we have an election coming up, they realize, as Jack Smith does, that the election next November is not happening in a vacuum. And for this justice process to take place and not be an interference in the election, which is not what Jack Smith wants, this issue needs to be resolved one way or the other so that we're not having this conversation the week before voting starts next November.
Calvin Dark, as always, thank you.
The United Nations